I'm going to, very briefly in fact, look at engaging students online. My name is Sheen and I'm in the Child and Family Studies department. Now, just a little bit of background so you know where I'm coming from. I run a foundation degree which is delivered entirely online. Okay, the students have a chance to come up maybe 3 times a year, but other than that, we are working online, we're working at a distance. However, as this idea of working online with students becomes more prevalent, and more lecturers are having to make the transition between working in the classroom and working online, I think programme leaders are going to become more challenged to support these lecturers in making that transition. So how do we support lecturers who traditionally work in a classroom environment, and how do we introduce them and help them become proficient working online, for example via Moodle? In the classroom, there are certain parameters which are fixed and help to support delivery. Very briefly, they're time bound. You know when it starts, you know when it finishes. You've got a controlled environment. You can manage what happens in that situation. You've got a group of students. The discussion, the engagement tends to come out of that automatically. It's immediate. If a student's got a question, they ask the question, you answer the question. If they look confused, you offer more explanation. You can give feedback. And it's content driven. You know what your learning objectives are and you manage your time to meet those objectives. However, when a lecturer is asked to work or swap to online delivery, then the parameters become blurred. It starts to look very different. Online delivery can be very time consuming. Lecturers need to be able to manage their own time, become organised, because they haven't got that boundary of a start and a finish time. It's a flexible environment. There are many different ways of delivering your content. Think about all the tools that are available to us in Moodle. You're usually dealing with individuals, and it's up to you as the lecturer to be bringing those individuals together to enable engagement to happen. And it's process driven. It doesn't really matter how good your content is, but if the students can't find it, or they're confused by it, or it doesn't make sense, then learning is not going to happen. Therefore, we can say that online learning is a very different beast from learning in the classroom. One of the issues that I frequently deal with is how to engage students online. It's easy, and we often say that online delivery is different, but what do we mean by different? And how can we manage this difference to avoid this? If we look briefly at sort of what happens in the classroom, now this is a very simplified view. We tend to have an element of passive and active. So the students will receive content, whether by PowerPoint, listening to the lecturer, they might be sitting there reflecting. Often though, there's an active element as well. They can discuss, ask questions, take notes, they make notes with zero to practice, give feedback and engage in different types of activity. Now, it's really easy to take the passive element of what happens in the classroom and put that into Moodle. What we're talking about is taking a PowerPoint or writing it even into a book or whatever, and that transfers across really well. However, sometimes that's where it stops, and we forget about the second part that happens in the classroom, the more active engagement. So the question is, if we can get the passive content across, how can we get that more active element of learning onto Moodle? I've been reading around sort of trying to find out ways of representing this that's going to make sense to sort of the lecturers that I work with, who work with me online. And I've come across something called Guerra's scale. This is by Tim Guerra and Dan Heffernan. And in 2004, they devised a scale which was to, if you like, to outline the range of the content that they found online. And there's an element of using online as well. They devised a scale from 1 to 10, basically. Number 1 on their scale was simply reading off the screen. And number 10 on their scale was complete virtual reality. Okay? In terms of Moodle, we can get down to about 7. We can't get past 7. Right? But that's enough for what we need, really. So if we think back and think about the passive and the active, in terms of what we can do with Moodle, you can see that GS1, GS2, they're clearly the passive elements. Okay? If all we do is put a Word document or a PDF onto Moodle and ask the students to read it, then we're not really engaging those students. We're at a passive end of our teaching. When we get to GS3, we're still quite passive, but we're starting to get there. GS4 to GS7, now we're talking. This is where we're starting to engage the students in the materials that we're putting onto Moodle. So, for example, rather than just putting up a presentation, if it has an audio background to it, so we're talking through the presentation. If we're using the book tool in Moodle and we're embedding media into that, if we're using screen capture, video demonstrations, GS6 is involved with what the students do, so student-generated materials. And GS7 is our most sort of engaging with the live chats, the forums, the wikis, collaborative wikis, and messaging. So in terms of where we want to be, really, if we're going to engage students in learning online, then we need to be embedding elements from GS4 to GS7 throughout our content, throughout our modules. Just very briefly, another way of looking at it is using Bloom's taxonomy. Now this is the revised taxonomy I'm using. But if we look at the domains, when we start to, again, engage students with doing stuff, then we need to be looking how Moodle will support that. And we need to be thinking about what can we do on Moodle so that the students are engaging and not just remembering. So, volume short and sweet. So to conclude then, online delivery is a very different beast from the classroom delivery, right? And we shouldn't just be expecting lecturers to move from one to the other without any type of support. It needs to be well thought through, so we avoid the difficulties and we avoid sort of issues and sort of lecturers coming on board, trying out e-learning or online learning, and then deciding very quickly that they don't like it, it's not for them. It's not because they can't do it, it's because they don't have the support that's going to get them to that successful position. Passive content translates really well onto Moodle, but we've got to think beyond that now. We've got to think, how are we going to actively engage the students? How do we get that more active content from Moodle? It's there. We just need to be pushing it into practice. That means we need to be able to understand and we need to know how to use the tools in Moodle, which will support the more active learning. And by this, it needs to be embedded into the content. It needs to be embedded into our sessions. It's not a treat when you put up a presentation with a piece of video in it or a voiceover. You know, it's not a delight to be delivered occasionally. It needs to be there throughout our content so that we are really engaging the students on our e-learning